First of all, it's such an honor to be with all of you here at the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. And I want to start with a story. Ray was a young Chinese man I met during a training in Jakarta in 2017. He told the story of how, as the Suharto dictatorship was falling apart in Indonesia, that the nationalists who supported him took to the airwaves and the national radio and said, "Oh, the Chinese, this fifth column in our society, is taking down our government. Young men of Java, come to the defense of the state." And so many did, and they attacked Chinese communities in Jakarta and elsewhere in Indonesia. Hundreds of thousands of businesses and homes were destroyed. And young Ray, a young Chinese man who was on his way home from school, couldn't go home and had to hide under one of the transportation bridges that crisscross the amazing megalopolis of Jakarta. He didn't know if his mother was alive. He didn't know if his house had been saved. Fast forward to the day after the Jakarta governor elections in 2017, where an anti-Chinese campaign had been conducted at the highest levels against the sitting governor of Jakarta, who had been defeated. A group of young people came together to share stories and to engage in what it would feel like to be a Jakartan at this moment of political rupture. As Ray told his story to his partner, I and my colleagues observed them getting even more agitated than we thought they would. And finally, they both, in tears and in argument, separated. It turned out that the young woman that Ray had been partnered with had come from a family background where the demonization of the Chinese was what she grew up with. And in admitting that, it triggered Ray. How could he work closely, share story with someone whose entire life had been shaped by anti-Chinese bias? As facilitators, we took a step back. Let's see where this goes. And what we saw happen was remarkable. As they both considered the stories that they told and the journeys that they had taken, what was hatred and chagrin and unease and fear started to change. They started hearing one another in a different way, because what they realized was that the emotions each had felt in their own story bound them together in a way that they didn't think was possible. Ray said, "I feared for my life and I wanted to hate you because your people hated me." What they realized was that fear is the cheapest room in the house. At least that's what the mystic Hafiz told us 1,000 years ago. He said to his friend, "I'd like to see you living in better conditions." I wonder how we as policymakers, bureaucrats, people working in civil society, are often acting on the basis of fear. I'm on a university campus right now in a moment of global mobilization and solidarity around the mass death in Gaza. I've seen what mobilization and fear and enmity looks like up close as young people begin and are engaging in trying to parse this out. Fear is never a good place to begin. You know that, I know that, and yet we also know that the institutions that we're part of are often acting out of fear. You who are Europeans are living through the aftermath of the European elections. If those elections and their results are not the result of fear, I don't know what is. In the work that I've been involved in, I think for most of my life, but in a concentrated way over the last 10 years, there's something remarkable that I've really learned. I think we know it in our bones. We know that storytelling is really the first empathy technology. And the story circle, human beings coming together, telling one another about their days and their lives, sitting in the democracy of a circle, focused on one another, listening to one another, mirroring one another's experience and language, affirming it, challenging it, and taking it in, is what my friend futurist Mark Gonzalez calls the first empathy technology. This empathy technology is a technology because it's a process. Storytelling is not a thing that we do, it's a process that we engage in. It has mechanics. It involves the whole of ourselves. We're not into dualisms or bifurcations here. To be a true storyteller and to be a true listener is to bring the whole of ourselves into the conversation. But here's where I want to make a little bit of a shift. We often speak, and you know this and I know this in my work, we often speak about narrative change, the importance of the right narrative, the importance of the right story, the importance of telling things the way they should be because we think it's going to lead to kind of social action, social change, social shift. The truth is, I think sometimes we focus on narrative too much and we don't focus on those telling the narrative. For me, it's the storyteller above the story first. There is no story without the storyteller. Stories don't just exist in the ether. Someone has to tell them. Someone's got to communicate them. Someone's got to shape them. Someone's got to deliver them. And whether that's an AI bot, which is programmed by somebody, an algorithm, whether it's a human being, whether it's a system, someone's telling the damn story. And so often we spend so much time on the stories, we don't spend time on the storytellers. Stories are nothing without storytellers. And so the work that I have had the privilege of engaging in partners with has really been about how do we support the storyteller? How do we get them into, how do we build up the transformational possibilities of their storytelling? Our project brought together a Canadian, British, Iraqi Jew, a Japanese, Indonesian Muslim, a Pakistani, Canadian, British Muslim, myself. When we walked into a coffee house in New Haven, Connecticut on a winter's night in 2015, we didn't know that a year later we'd been working in Indonesia in 5 cities where there had been horrific interreligious violence. What we founded was something called cerita. Cerita means story in Indonesian language. And it's simple. How do we capacity build change makers and storytellers to tell stories that heal and transform, not stories that harm? What are the narrative tools that we can empower storytellers with so that their stories not only mean something, but can be, and this is the important part, can be the stuff, the manna of connection between people who are often speaking at opposite sides of real social, economic, and political fracture. That's why pedagogy matters. You know that in your work. The way we approach knowledge, the way we generate knowledge, the way we teach matters. The way we engage storytellers and the modalities that we use matters. If we are using modalities that are top-down, that reinforce power structures, that see the pie as limited and not expansive, we're going to get bad storytellers, bad stories, ergo, we're wasting our time. We're replicating the same systems of oppression, marginalization that exist all around us, and I think that we care deeply about. In Sri Lanka last summer, we engaged with a group of teachers, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, coming from Tamil, Sinhalese backgrounds in the aftermath of a vicious and violent civil war. These teachers were looking at each other and saying, we teach in parochial schools. I only teach Tamil kids. I only teach Sinhalese Buddhist kids. How do we get our kids together to share the stories? One of our teachers, an amazing young woman, said to us, well, I don't know how to do that because I went through a school system where I was treated like the enemy. She literally had to wear a sign around her neck for being a Sri Lankan Muslim who used to ask questions in class and literally was said, see that kid there? That's a dangerous kid. You don't want to hang around that kid. And now that very person was in a room with other educators. And what was remarkable was this is the first time she'd ever told that story. And her telling that story opened everyone up. It was a moment of vulnerability and connection because that sense of being excluded wasn't just hers. It was shared by everyone. We use a number of interesting pedagogies. We use the work of Marshall Gantz and public narrative. the story of self, us, and now. We know that stuff. We use the work of Auguste Boal in the Theater of the Oppressed. We look at interworld view. We see people not just as singular silos, but as complex human beings who bring multiple identities into the work that they do. There was a moment, and I'll conclude on this. There was a moment in the Netherlands where in inner city Amsterdam, we have civil society activists from the Arab Moroccan community, we have lawyers from the city government, and we have police and civil society. Folks who don't see eye to eye. And all of a sudden, we're asking them to tell their story, their positionality, and to listen. Many of the activists said, I've never been in this situation with a cop before. One activist who had been at the front lines of defending her community against what she considered police violence said at the end, I've never seen a cop cry. And now I'm sharing things I haven't even shared with my closest friend, with the cop who is policing my community. They hugged and they cried together. Because once you got away from the uniform, and once we started telling stories and embodying the drama, of jumping in, of allowing our embodied theater work to allow a cop to all of a sudden become an activist, something amazing happened. What would happen if we would take this into our policy spaces? How about a policy meeting where we do the theater of the oppressed? How about policy spaces where we do public narrative? Marshall Gantz, my teacher and my mentor in the work of public narrative, quotes from Rabbi Hillel. And these ancient words, I think, are important for you and me in the work that we're doing today. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? None of us stands alone, and yet we know that we need connection. When I am only for myself, what am I? If all of us were to disappear and it was only you in the room, who would you be? What would you stand for? What are your ethics? What are your morals? What are your beliefs? Do you feel confident speaking them? And if you don't, why not? What are the systems around us that prevent our communication from being stymied, limited, and therefore push us back into systems which extract, control, and are not expansive? And finally, the rabbi, thousands of years ago, asked us the question, if not now, when? If I connect to you and you connect to me, if we have such different stories but we find a humanity, if I'm not bounded by my religion, my ethnicity only, I'm all of those things and I'm a human being in relationship with you and you and you, then what can we do together now? What is that moment of energy? And you know it. You know it because your work shows it. You know when you make that connection. The moment of energy, the energetic moment where two people connect, that's the moment we got to capture. What do we do together? What is our now? What are we working towards? Make it precise, as Marshall would say. Make it real, make it doable, and then do it. That is the possibility of stories. That is the possibilities of connection. And for me, I see no reason why that in our spaces, in our bureaucracies, in our systems, in our structures, we cannot make that connection. In fact, today, we need solutions that are not only outside the box, but that rehumanize our institutions. There's nothing more human than human beings telling one another their stories and their life experiences. Let's build structure around it and use it as an engine for transformation and change, even across the most difficult and fractious political and economic and social circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.